Welcome to Financial Fortitude. Today's episode is all about kicking off 2025 with purpose and focusing by setting SMART goals, a tried and true approach to turning your ambitions into achievable milestones.
Whether you're aiming to boost your savings, pay off debt, or plan for a major life event, setting goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound can be a game changer for your financial journey. In this episode, we'll break down each part of the SMART framework, share practical examples, and give you the tools you need to plan for success in the new year.
If you're ready to make 2025 your best financial year yet, let's dive into how you can be smart with your goals and take practical steps to becoming an extraordinary wealth builder.
Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We're your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in.
Brady, how's it going, man?
Very good. I ought to ask you a similar question. How are things with you and the family?
Family's good. For our listeners, my wife and I just welcomed our fourth child into our family, which is exciting. So we've expanded some, and this was something that we did plan for. This was a goal of ours to continue to expand our family, which is fitting for today's conversation around goal planning as we prepare to wrap up 2024 and head into 2025, which is just mind-blowing to me that the year's just flown by. But yet here we are.
So talk to us a little bit more from a goal planning perspective. What has that looked like in the past in the Acosta household, and how might it look moving into 2025?
For us, we've almost made it a tradition to where near the end of every year, my wife and I will sit down and we'll think of things that we want to accomplish personally as individuals, but also jointly as a unit, as a family. What are the things we want to do to help us grow professionally, financially, spiritually? What are the things that we want to be able to afford our children from an experience perspective? That way we can map out the things that we need to do on our end in order to put us in the best possible situation to be able to put a massive check mark next to that, right? We want to be able to measure our success throughout the course of the year. And one of my favorite quotes out there with respect to setting goals is by Tony Robbins, none other, of course. And it goes something like this: setting goals is the first step in turning the invisible into the visible. And I think this is important just from a mind frame perspective, because if we don't take the time to lay out the things that we want to work towards or the things that we have aspirations to achieve, then it's very hard to dedicate our true efforts, our focused efforts towards being purpose-driven with the things that we're doing day in and day out.
And I think it's super relevant for all individuals, for clients, for anyone in working towards turning their dreams into realities. Getting things down on paper or being purposeful in how we're planning for the future makes that much easier.
Absolutely. And we've talked about it time and time again on this podcast that there is a daily assault on our attention. And aside from time being one of our most finite resources, our attention is even more finite because we are being programmed to be distracted day in and day out by the phones that we have in our pockets and the apps that direct our time. So with that being said, let's talk about what are some practical things that listeners should be thinking about as we come to a close of 2024 and head into 2025 with respect to goals.
I think some practical things to consider is that in starting 2025, this conversation is super relevant because every ship ultimately needs a heading, right? And the most efficient way to move from point A to point B, or most efficient way to plan your journey, is by having a heading. And setting goals, no matter how big or small, as you mentioned, from an attention span perspective, helps break decisions into bite-sized planning pieces. It makes it easier to jump from one stone to the next as, hey, this is the direction that we're headed, or this is the big picture goal that we're working towards.
And another example or illustration that I like to think of is if I'm going to go hiking, I at least like to have an idea of where I'm starting and where I plan on heading to and what it might look like to make my way back, right? Every once in a while, you'll get a wild hair and you'll just say, hey, I'm going to wing it. I'm just going to go off on this hike. More often than not, that's probably not the most practical thing to do. So when it comes to starting the year, if you're in a situation to where you make strong income and you're able to manage your lifestyle needs, or what we refer to your burn rate, then with all of the excess cash flow that you may or may not have, let's be practical with it and let's dedicate it towards a purpose, things that you want to achieve personally, professionally, and financially. So talk to me a little bit about what this looks like day in and day out when you sit down with your clients or with individuals that come through the door and want to meet with somebody from our team.
Sure. So day in and day out, what we're looking towards, or at least helping, is to really foster the conversation in this SMART framework that we have alluded to in the intro of the episode. It's helping clients set specific goals, right? Goals that have a meaning, a purpose, a why, and goals that clearly outline here's what we're looking to accomplish and here's how things might play out in the future. Another part of that SMART framework, the M, is measurable. We want clients to set goals that, hey, they can look back and say, here's what progress has looked like. Here's how much more that we have to achieve or how much farther that we have to go.
Now, when you're having these conversations with clients, are they primarily just personal goals? Like, what all are you interweaving through these conversations so that you can better Sherpa your clients into how these goals should be laid out?
Sure. Yeah. So generally, the framework that we use there is to start with personal goals. That's oftentimes what is most important for clients. Hey, what do you want to accomplish as an individual, as a family, as a person first? That could be anything from buying their first home to starting a family to going on vacation, right? To spending time with people that they love. But where oftentimes we're also diving into is, what does your professional life look like? What are your professional goals? How much you want to advance? Are you interested in starting a business? What do you see or what's important for your career development? And then the last one that we oftentimes discuss, especially being in the industry, is the financial piece, right? What numbers do we need to hit? What does our financial standing need to look like? What's important to us from a financial perspective?
I think that that's important. And I would even say that tends to be one of my favorite aspects of our engagements or encounters with our clients or prospective clients, is because we're truly trying to understand what makes them tick. And just like a DNA helix, the personal, professional, financial goals will often intertwine with one another. And just the other day, I was speaking with somebody who wants to grind in a corporate role until age, let's call it 52, 55, and then wants to be able to have things in position for them to be able to step back and have the opportunity to make less money, or maybe even own a business or multiple smaller businesses to supplement the lost income that they would have otherwise had from the corporate job that's just very demanding, right? And this is a younger couple, young growing family, and that's aspirational, right? And so now it's a conversation of, well, how do we make it work? Like, if we have this idea appear in the ether that's like, hey, I want to be able to achieve this, and this is what I want it to look like aesthetically. What do we need to start doing to building the foundation and framing it out so that we can put ourselves in a position to win, right? So that we can put ourselves in a position to find success. Now, what I think is somewhat misleading about the word success is that it's not the same for everybody. It's going to be different. And it's almost like the old saying that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Well, success is defined by the person who's achieving it, right? And it's not a one size fits all, which makes success great. Now, there are certain aspects of success that are measurable and it's definitive, right? And there's others where it's very subjective. So I'm mainly talking about the subjective aspects of success when I make that point.
And I think that's what makes goal planning in and of itself so challenging, is all of us would love to measure success the exact same way. All of us would love to say, here are the 5 to 10 things that we need to accomplish as a family, but every family unit, every individual looks and feels different for them. So as easy as it might feel to say, here are what my goals are, here's where I want to be, it's much more challenging to actually break it into all of the specific pieces. It's much more challenging to set measurables to assess progress. It's hard to know what's achievable, what's not achievable. And then it makes it even more challenging to put the pressure on yourself and bound things with a little bit of time or urgency and relevance, right, to where they're headed.
Right. No, I love that. So let's actually break this down a little bit, right? So we're focused on SMART framework, right? SMART. So let's start with the first one, S, which is specific, right? So how specific should we be when we're defining our goals?
I think ideally we'd want to be hyper specific. I think the biggest challenge for a lot of clients is very few of, I mean, maybe even you and I don't know what next week might look like, let alone what next year or the next decade might look like. So I think the approach that we take with individuals or encourage individuals to take is, well, let's work through the dream first, right? How do we see things in a perfect world playing out? Where would you love to see yourself? What would you love to be doing? Let's just get the dream out there first. And then it makes it a little bit easier to, hey, let's paint the picture of what the day-to-day or the year-to-year looks like in that dream. And then it makes it even easier to start working towards more of the specifics, almost working backwards, right? Well, hey, if the dream is to own a vacation house by the beach, what does that picture look like? What are you going to be doing? Who's going to be there? How much time will you be spending there? And then it gets easier to say, well, here's where the home might be. Here's how much the home might cost. Here's how many people need to live or fit in it. And then from there, it gets even easier and easier to set targets or to find those next stepping stones or milestones to hit.
The analogy I like to think about there is if I am Michelangelo and I'm about to create a masterpiece out of marble, I'm usually going to start with a massive marble slab, right? It's just going to be very broad, smooth edges more often than not. And from there, I'm just going to start chiseling away at this marble slab and making this once square or rectangle into a masterpiece based off of what I'm envisioning in my mind or what I put down into paper. So again, setting the goal and being specific is taking what's invisible and making it visible, not only for yourself, but also for anyone that you want to help hold you accountable, right? So with that, some of the practical tips in defining these specific goals, one of those is to share those dreams. Be vocal about it, right? Don't be bashful. Also, don't be afraid, like you mentioned, to paint with bright colors, meaning if you want it to be hyper specific, then be hyper specific to the T. And that's okay. And also, what we're going to get into next is setting the target through measurables. So talk to me about measurables, which is the second aspect of this SMART framework.
Sure. I think before we jump to measurables, the question that I have for you is, in your client conversations, what are you seeing in today's world as some specifics? What are some of those common goals that a lot of people are working towards?
I'd say some of the most common ones, especially for the demographic of folks that we work with, is either, and I'm going to give you three specific because of the niches of folks that we encounter. But one is often, hey, I want to be able to enjoy my life now while having some sort of definitive game plan for how do I address these six figures in student loan debt. That's probably one of my most favorite ones because of the great work that we can do with how we manage the student loans, whether it's someone who's public service loan forgiveness driven or time-based forgiveness driven. Another one might be a medical professional who wants to or has aspirations in not only just owning one medical practice, but owning multiple medical practices, right? Think of someone like a dentist who wants to be able to go out and buy into a practice and maybe even buy it out. And then in a couple of years, buy a second one and then a third one, and then go from working in the chair to now overseeing who's working in the chair and taking more of a CEO approach. The last goal that's very common for our clients is, hey, I just want to be able to get into retirement when my human capital goes away and know what I have the opportunity to live off of. But more importantly than that, I want to know that my money's not going to run out. And that one's probably my second favorite because this is where we really get to make dreams come true, right? Based on the great work that we get to do.
The nature of that longer term retirement goal is a bigger dream. It's a bigger slab of concrete to work with. So it's oftentimes the most exciting goal to really talk through. And I think the other really fun or exciting thing is that conversation looks different, especially in a family unit for one spouse versus the other spouse. There's a lot of working on the slab together, which I think makes the finding specificity in your goals both challenging, but also really rewarding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say a good example as we segue into measurable is we get to act as that mediator, that third party that's very objective and sit in a role very similar to an architect who's designing a blueprint for a custom home. And I love to get the couples or the significant others or the spouses into this conversation because a lot of the times they're on the same page and a lot of the times they're not. And so then it becomes a question of, okay, well, how do we design this blueprint then if we have conflicting thoughts, right? But we're going to be specific about this goal. Now let's figure out how do we measure it? What are the metrics that need to be monitored and reviewed on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're trending in the right direction?
I think this is one of the challenges per se in goal planning because it's easy to paint the picture, right? It's easy to bring the slab into the art studio. It's more challenging to step back and look at the slab every quarter or every year and say, here's how the artwork's looking at this point. So things that we oftentimes are encouraging those to focus on is let's work on regular pulse checks to see where we stand from a milestone perspective. That could be as simple as, have we made progress since the last time we visited this conversation in any form or fashion? And then checking back on, well, how much?
Yeah. And I would say it's the difference between goals-based planning and just broad-based financial planning is the proactive touch points. Are you proactively checking in and monitoring the actions that are being taken in order to confirm or deny whether or not we're making strides in the right direction, right? With the understanding that life will often happen. So even though we're being hyper-focused in the details, and even though we're setting benchmarks and metrics to be able to measure our success or our wins, we also want to identify some of our losses, right? Because not every headline tells the full story. And so this is where we want to be able to understand, okay, well, let's use a prime example of somebody who's gotten really good and diligent in automating their savings. They've become an extraordinary wealth builder where they're setting aside 20% of their annual gross income back onto their balance sheet in some form or capacity. We're hitting the framework of setting aside, let's just say it's a married couple, 3 months worth of living expenses, an emergency fund or a risk-free bucket of cash. And they're progressing, they're on track. We're going to hit it by the next time that we meet next quarter. And then we meet next quarter and they're like, hey, we had a medical bill that came out of nowhere and it kind of put a pause on the progress that we've been making.
Yeah. Huge win, right? For quite a long time. Hey, for quarter after quarter after quarter, we've been doing nothing but succeeding or winning. And then life throws us a surprise and all of that progress seems to erode away.
Yeah. And in that moment, you can almost feel how the client might become deflated or unmotivated or like they failed. And that's where humanizing this process, humanizing the financial planning approach is important, because it's often the response from us is, hey, let's give ourselves a little bit of grace. What would have happened if we didn't have those funds available to be able to withstand the storm that life threw at us, right? We would be in a worse off situation had we been ill prepared, right? The good thing is that we were proactively preparing and taking the appropriate steps. We just needed more time to be able to check this off of having 3 months worth of living expenses set aside.
Yeah, and let's take that same scenario of setting living expenses aside, saving 20% of gross income, winning month after month, but only to find, and I think you and I have seen this many a time, is, hey, clients doing all of the right things on paper, but then their lifestyle is affected thereafter. Hey, we don't go out to eat as much. We really enjoyed that in the past. Hey, we didn't take the vacation this year because we were more set on that 20% number. That's really deflated our sense of purpose with our family. Right. So it's wins and losses in both directions of saying, you know what, it's important that we're working towards our goals, but it's important that we're giving ourselves some grace, we're making adjustments, and we're really doing some learning about how we feel about humanizing the financial experience.
Absolutely. And for someone who's like, hey, you know what, going on a family vacation every year with our young children is more important than hitting 20%, I'm all for it, because your children are only going to be small for so long. Right. And we're not promised tomorrow. So if it's a matter of saving 17% of your annual gross income instead of 20%, hey, that is a solid win. We're saving more than what we were before we met. And it's only a season of life because, like I mentioned, your children will only be small for so long. And then it's a matter of, okay, well, when they go off to college and you become an empty nester, now you have the capacity more often than not to be able to save at a higher clip to where we can make up some of the smaller amounts of wealth that we were putting aside during the time and seasons of life when we were really entrenched with our family and our children.
And I think it's important to do a lot of measuring in that sense too, because goals change, right? As seasons of life change, as wins and losses begin to get tallied up in each column, our Michelangelo statue that we were building 10 years ago may not look the same as we were hoping to now, as we've stepped into a new stage of life where we've started to tally up, hey, what those wins and losses have looked like in the past.
Right. Now, are there any sort of tools that you encourage your clients or anyone that you engage with to use to help measure this if they're wanting to DIY or do it themselves?
Great question. So our biggest thing from a measurable perspective really is founded in organization. Right? It's very easy to measure what progress and success looks like if we're organized. We know where all of our different pieces are. Some tools that we find are very helpful for clients, things like Monarch Money, right? It tracks all of the different credit cards that you have. It tracks all of the investment accounts that you have. It tracks your whole financial situation. One of the tools that we also love and that we work with clients day in and day out with is the living balance sheet, right? That financial MRI or snapshot as to what their whole world looks like It's very easy to say, here's what the organizational picture looked like 6 months ago. Here's where we are now. Let's tally up those wins and losses. And then tools like Credit Karma or Mint, formerly known mint.com, examples too. Here's where we were, here's where we are, right? All founded in being organized, staying organized.
Yeah, and that organization that comes from these tools, and again, this is no sort of promotion of these platforms or tools or apps by any means, but what makes these great for households or professionals or business owners is the aggregational aspect, right? It's the aggregation that allows them to become organized. Some tools have better perks than others around budgeting or around just overall forecasting. The reason why we love the living balance sheet is because we're able to give a concise snapshot of not only what's going on the financial balance sheet, assets minus liabilities, giving them, the clients, their overall measurable net worth, but also what does the financial immune system look like, right? Like how are we protecting our wins and our losses? But even more importantly, the cash flow management side of things, because it's really hard to be successful with working towards our goals if we're not managing our cash flow in an appropriate manner, which leads us into, I would say, the next letter of the SMART framework, right? Let's talk about the A, the achievable. So break this down for me.
So oftentimes when individuals are sharing or building their dream and then beginning to paint the picture, the experience can vary widely, right? Some clients have some hyper-specific, shorter term or more achievable goals. Here's what we want to happen. And here's where we see our goal, right? I want 3 months of an emergency fund saved. And then we may speak to another individual who says, I want to live in a mansion one day. And perhaps that day even being next year, right? I want to live in a home that's 2 or 3 times as big. And so in this world of setting goals, measuring what our progress looks like, a very important part of building confidence and starting to tally a lot of the check marks in the win column is setting goals that are both aspirational, but also realistic for where we stand today and where we might stand in the future.
Yeah. And a lot of this will even fall in line with when we're having that conversation with couples or even individuals where it's like, okay, well, we want to be able to save up to buy our first property, our first home, right? What does that look like? Well, we don't know if we're going to do 20% down, 15% down, 10% down. But what I do know is that we're planning on expanding our family before the end of this year, and we need to purchase a bigger vehicle to support our now growing family. Well, in that scenario, we probably aspire to have the home first, but in the grand scheme of things, that child is going to be born by the end of this year. And we can still make things work with where we live today, but we know that, hey, as rates come down, we want to be able to work towards purchasing that first home. So in that scenario, even though the home is a higher priority emotionally, the reality of that is that you're probably going to be purchasing a larger vehicle before you purchase that home, right? So when we're putting these specific goals on paper, one of the additional exercises that we have to go through and that we often walk all clients through is let's put these in order from highest priority to lowest priority. And through that, we're able to identify how achievable are these in the shortest period of times, some sort of intermediate period of time, but also longer term frameworks.
Yep. And I think it helps when we begin to prioritize goals in that manner to begin snowballing success, right? If we can break our goals into bite-sized pieces as we work towards putting the down payment for the new car, as it's the highest priority or the biggest need in the family, it's easy to say, hey, we've checked that off. There's a tally in the win column. And then it makes it that much easier to build off of the success that we've already begun in achieving that next goal, right? Hey, now all of our free cash flow, all of our asset building is going to go to the home down payment. All of our cash flow thereafter is going to be to the furniture and getting the house set up for the new family as we move into it. And snowballing a lot of those wins not only help build confidence, especially from a goal planning and that dream perspective, but they build a realistic set of steps that you can step towards in your financial journey.
And some of this is starting to compound off one another, right? Almost snowball, to use your term, snowballing as we work through this framework. Because from a starting point of assessing how achievable is this list of goals? I think it's going to start off with, well, let's just first get organized, right? We continue to reiterate, you have to be organized when you are goal planning. And the statement or analogy we like to use, it's very similar to cleaning out the junk drawer. Everyone's got one in their home. You know exactly where it's at. And more often than not, it's probably got a bunch of batteries in it. It's got a bunch of charger cords, just a bunch of random things, right? And every so often you'll go in and you'll clean it out. And within a matter of time, it gets filled to the brim with more stuff. And so again, when we're trying to identify how achievable are these goals, let's first get organized. Let's first identify, well, is this a necessity or is this a desirable? Another way of saying that, is this a need or a want? And it's okay to have wants, but this is going to continue to help us be hyper-focused on, okay, well, let's be realistic around this. Which of these goals is going to take place first? And what are the actions that need to be taken in order to make sure that we're in the most optimal position to be able to check this off and to say, hey, we accomplished it in the time frame that we set.
And it helps move things into more bite-sized chunks, right? Every action or every decision that we make, it's easier to say, hey, this decision is moving us towards our goals from a big picture or a small picture perspective, versus this decision is moving us away from our goals. The junk drawer is organized at this point. We know what next decision to make to help get us closer to what we want to accomplish. When the junk drawer is not organized, we might pull a dead battery out instead of a live battery out, is the analogy that I use. Like, figured that this is going to work. Now it doesn't. I have to got to go find another set of batteries, or I got to go reorganize our situation in the junk drawer to get what we need.
So at this point, we've already made it through the first 3 letters of the SMART framework, right? We went through S, which was specific, M, which was measurable, A, which is achievable. R is going to stand for relevant, right? And this is timely, and it goes back to the specific aspect of this framework. So talk to me a little bit about relevance and how this fits into the overall framework of setting goals.
This is my favorite letter in the whole SMART framework, because this is where we get to go really deep in defining why, right? The joke that we often tell is the question that I ask most to clients or individuals through any conversation is always why, and then why again, right? Because all of us have specific goals. All of us have this big dream and we've painted this big picture. But very few of us, and even me included, oftentimes can tell you the true why behind a particular goal. And that's all about what this relevant topic or this relevant chunk of the planning is about. And we like to use a number of different analogies here, right? I hear friends, family, others say, hey, I want to get in shape again, or I want to get in better shape. I think we all want to do that. And the question oftentimes is, well, why? Right? For some people, that might be so I can play with my kids more. Right? I was in great shape when I was younger. My kids have gotten a little bit older now, and I just can't spend as much time with them or can't keep up with them anymore. I want to get in shape. Or for clients or individuals we find are older, I don't want to be a burden on my family anymore. I want to get back in shape. It's a goal of mine.
I can associate with that very, very much with where I'm at in life right now. And you're right. It's a matter of, what am I going to be doing now to be able to help me work towards getting back into shape?
Yep. It's the why.
Right. Something so simple as, it's the why. So the why is what helps motivate us, is what I'm understanding, right? And once we're motivated, we can now start to put a framework in place that will allow us to find success, or at least put us in a position to find success. And then along the way is where we start to measure it so that we can continue to stay motivated, right? So me as an example, I want to get back in shape so that I can be running half marathons and 10Ks and 5Ks were my PRs. Right. And this was before child 1, 2, 3, and now 4. It just becomes more and more difficult. You can only push so many of them in a bob stroller, right? It's almost like sled training at this point. No, but in all seriousness, for me, it's I want to be around long enough with my kids and my family, making memories that they'll always remember. And it's through those interactions.
And how much easier is it for you to show up to the gym every single day when that's your motivation, instead of, hey, wouldn't a six-pack be fun or be cool?
I mean, a six-pack would be fun or cool, but, you're right. It's more personal and there's more meaning behind it, which keeps me motivated, right? And there's more responsibility tied to it as well, which makes it more realistic versus, hey, six-pack would be awesome, but I'm going to go ahead and veg with these chips and watch my favorite show.
Yeah, we see the same thing with vacation goals. I want to go on a big, lavish vacation. I want to spend a lot of time on vacation. Our question is always why. For some, it's, hey, I want to spend more time with my family. I want to experience things that I was never able to. I want to share experiences with people that I wasn't able to have or that I've always dreamed of having, right? That motivation is so much stronger. And really, where we tend to find a lot of our client goals kind of track towards, especially when speaking with someone for the first time, is the goal that we always hear is, well, Michael or Brady, I want to make more money, or I want to have the most money. And what do you oftentimes discover is the why in those type of conversations?
Well, the why there is usually they just want freedom to do whatever they want. Or in some instances, it's, hey, it's because the upbringing I had or the life I lived coming up did not afford me the opportunities that I think I want or have the opportunity for today. And so maybe it's being more frivolous with my money because I never had money to be frivolous with before. So this is a new sensation for me, right? For better or for worse. It's human nature. So we have to acknowledge it, whether it's a great attribute or not. And so for a lot of them, it's, hey, I want to make more money because I want to then be able to do all these things. I want to go on trips. I want to purchase a first home. I want to be able to create passive income so I don't have to work in my current career, right? I can have more freedom of time and more control over time and finances. Or I want to be more philanthropic, right? I want to be able to go Shaq on people when you see those videos of Shaq in, a Walmart or wherever, and he's just picking a random parent with their children and he's like, hey, let's go fill up a couple carts and we'll go check out and I'm paying for it and you guys get to enjoy this. Let me bless you, right? There are people out there who want to do that and that's admirable. So that's really where it stems from. But when you just vaguely say, hey, I just want to make more money, I'm like laughing inside now because I know my first question is going to be, why?
Yep.
Why do you need more money? Is it because you think you need more money to support your current lifestyle? Or is it because there's more that you want to achieve, right? And to harp on a little bit of like retirement deaccumulation planning, a lot of people think, even financial planners today, that you need to have millions and millions of dollars in order to retire successfully for 20 or 25 years. In the grand scheme of things, if you have a low standard of living, if you have a very low burn rate, you don't need nearly as much assets to be able to support the longevity of your life, right? Especially if your Social Security benefit or any sort of pension income is covering most of that for you. And so this is where we will often say financial planning and living your life is not a spreadsheet, right? There's more to it than that. And when we solely focus on the spreadsheet metrics of it all, we dehumanize the journey that we're on. And we start to allow things to creep in that will hold us back from finding success because we now become distracted from what's truly important.
And that's where or why I like this relevant section of the SMART framework the best. Because ultimately, all of us as humans desire experiences over numbers. And this section is fantastic, at least to have a personal conversation either with yourself, with your spouse, or with anyone else involved in your goals, and just being more action-oriented and asking the why question before we just tack on, here's the next goal on our list.
And I'll add to this that the relevance piece is important because oftentimes as we have the prioritized goals set out, right, for us to be able to monitor and measure, things will come up that were not expected. And this is where we, as the third party, the objective advisor in this working relationship, get to say, hey, this is a great goal, right? Let's not discount it or dismiss it, but tell me how focusing our efforts on this, focusing your cash flow on this, is going to get you closer to these other goals that you've prioritized as being more important. So it brings back the accountability. Now, maybe that new goal that came to light is something that gets added to the fold. And if it is the most important goal now, then let's restructure things. Let's reprioritize your efforts and let's get back on track with what we can control and what's most pressing in this current moment. And so that's where the relevance comes into play.
Yeah, it's almost a perfect segue when you mention the word accountability to the last chunk of the framework, the T, which stands for time bound. Tell us a little bit more as to why having time bound goals is important, and then perhaps how you encourage setting those bounds.
Yeah, so time bound goals are important primarily because it makes things more realistic. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we'll meet with a young couple or a young professional who's, I'd say, early on or even in the mid stage of their career. And they're so hyper-focused on retirement, planning for retirement, that they're overlooking everything between now and retirement, right? They're being dismissive to the garden of flowers in front of them on their journey and just stepping over them because they've been ingrained with, hey, if you're not hyper focused on saving for retirement, then you will be a failure in retirement. And that's not necessarily true, right? It just creates anxiety and frustration and a sense of being overwhelmed. And a prime example that I can give with a recent client interaction with where time bound comes into play is husband and wife who want to be able to gift money to their 3 children, and they have spread out ages. And so the timeline in their mind is, hey, we want to be able to give them funds that they can either use for college or that they can use for a down payment on a home or to start a business, whatever it might be, right? And it's understanding that, hey, once we know what that timeline looks like, we can start to reverse engineer mathematically what we need to be setting aside. And so what seemed like a daunting, massive goal, when we actually crunched the numbers and did a technical analysis of it, it was like, hey, we actually don't need as high of a return in the stock market. We can be relatively not aggressive with this approach. And it's really going to be indicative of, well, what are we actually setting aside for our 3 children? Like, what's the dollar amount? And understanding that the youngest child is going to need less each month from a contribution or each year from a contribution perspective versus the oldest child, because the youngest child has a longer runway. And so if you're trying to be equitable or fair across all children, then it's just understanding that, hey, the end goal here is the final amount. All the other variables we will start to massage and figure out along the way once we've identified what that target is. Yep. And so again, the time-bound piece is important because you're going to set deadlines for yourself. It's either going to create a sense of urgency that's necessary, or you'll be able to say, hey, it's not as urgent as I thought it was. I have time. I'm not going to have a complete failure of a retirement if I'm not putting 10, 12, 15% towards my 401k. I can redirect some of those dollars elsewhere, either for enjoying my life today or to build some more diversification of overall assets between liquid assets and what we would call handcuffed assets that are in a 401k or an IRA.
And the time piece is also huge or super important because it's where rubber hits the road for most strategy decision making. From the strategy decision-making standpoint, if we know this goal is hyper important to accomplish in the next 10 years, it makes it much easier to, as you mentioned, reverse engineer what the actual strategy is going to take to get from point A to point B. Right? It's great to stay accountable to yourself and to stay honest with, here's what my progress looks like, here's how I'm measuring my goals, here's how I'm looking at the wins and the losses and the feelings that I have. But the time is ultimately what's going to develop and then continue to massage what the strategy looks like financially.
And I know for us, when we have that first conversation, what I like to refer to as that first date, where we're really trying to get to know who our clients are personally, professionally, and financially, and understanding, do we like each other, trust each other, and do we feel like we're compatible? We will often set the stage, or at least the framework of, hey, let's not go beyond 3 to 5, 5 to 7 years, right? We might be able to dip our toe into a 7 to 10 year time horizon. And the reason being is because things start to become very hard to control variable wise, because we just don't know what's going to happen with the economy, with interest rates, with the overall stock market. We can't control that. And so let's focus on smaller bite-size type of time horizons, but we still need to then segment them into short-term, mid-term, and longer-term goals, even within that framework, because that will also help us from a prioritization standpoint to recognize that, hey, this is something that's probably going to be accomplished within the next 6 months to a year versus something that's going to be on the back nine, closer to that 5 to 7 year target.
So we've gone through the entire framework on goal setting for 2025. Specific first, setting specific goals, measuring progress, wins and losses and learnings, defining what an achievable or realistic goal looks like versus an aspirational or unrealistic goal, really digging into why relevance is important, and time bounding nearly everything. I guess the last question that I have for you is, when it comes to pitfalls or mistakes or things that you see clients have challenges with, hey, Brady, hey, Michael, I've gone through this whole SMART framework and the rubber just really didn't hit the road this last year. What are some of those things that really get in the way or become obstacles in goal setting?
The things that come up most common as obstacles that get in the way from finding success with goal setting is going to be falling back into disorganization One of the root causes to that can be consumer debt. Usually, if our consumer debt or our outstanding debt balances just spiral out of control, we don't even want to look at it. We don't even want to look at the finances. And it's just better served to just say, hey, I'm going to make a larger payment than what I'm making, but there's no real tactical approach to why we're paying what we're paying, right? Or understanding when we're going to be done targeting this debt. Another one is going to be misalignment of prioritization, right? Things come up. We have to acknowledge that life happens for better or for worse. But if we've already identified our goals and put them in order from highest to lowest priority, we have to try and stay as true to that as possible. And when new things come up, things need to be reshuffled around, and then we can readdress how we're deploying resources. So again, one is going to be allowing ourselves to relapse from our, what I would call diet. We've done a really good job of going to the gym, being mindful of what we're eating, but we took way too many cheat days. And now it's like, hey, this is too big of a hill to overcome. So I'm just going to, be mediocre at this point when it comes to my personal fitness.
Too many Oreos.
Too many Oreos. A second one is going to be misprioritization because life is happening. And I would say the third one is the squirrel effect, right? You've been working really hard on your goals and all of a sudden you got the squirrel. And it's, hey, I am now distracted because of everything that's being thrown at me, either by colleagues, either by family members, either by social media. And we can fall into this trap of what used to be known as keeping up with the Joneses and what I like to refer to as keeping up with the Kardashians, right? And this is almost like a Trojan horse into our personal finances because it makes us think that what we're dedicating our efforts and resources towards is going to provide us with higher levels of gratitude or even satisfaction. And more often than not, it doesn't. Right? If we would have stayed true to our original framework, we would have found that there were higher potentials for greater satisfaction.
I guess the big picture summary there is through the course of the year, or through the course of those measurable timeframes, we've got to work on staying organized. We've got to work on being specific throughout the course of our measured checkpoints and success. And we've got to keep the vision on what's most important to us or the picture that we have painted.
Correct.
So big picture, throughout the course of the year, what are easy things to do or easy ways to avoid falling into the trap of perhaps not staying on the course that we had set in the beginning of the year? It's one, staying organized. It's two, keeping our priorities in order, or at least being specific and targeted as to when our priorities change and why. And then it's not getting distracted, keeping up with the Kardashians or just jumping into what seems like the next best thing when we've already painted our picture. We've already painted what our dream looks like in the future.
And with that wraps up today's episode on smart goal setting. We hope you're feeling inspired and ready to set some purpose-driven goals for 2025. Remember, making your goals specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound can give you the structure and focus you need to move forward with confidence.
And if you found this conversation helpful, please share with a friend, a family member, a spouse, even if it's just to spark the conversation and get individuals speaking about what's most important to them, working on painting that dream or that big picture.
And remember, Michelangelo's masterpieces weren't created overnight. We started with a broad-based slab of marble and over time chipped away to make it as detail-oriented as possible and ultimately ended up with a masterpiece over time. Make sure you're taking the time to map out your financial goals using this SMART framework. Small steps today can lead to big changes tomorrow.
And thank you for tuning into Financial Fortitude. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share with someone who might find it valuable, and let us know if there's a topic you'd like to cover in future episodes. And here's to making 2025 your best financial year yet. Thank you for joining us this week on the Financial Fortitude podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and learned something along the way.
If you're looking for financial guidance that is personalized to your specific needs, we're here to help. Visit us at www.genesiswealthplanning.com to book a complimentary consultation.
That's it for today. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And as always, please share with others you feel could benefit from the show. See you next time.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hemmerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077.
6991809.6, expiration 1226.